Mike Owens here. Today I'm joined by Brian Campbell, one half of the award-winning Morning Combat, who's here today to preview UFC 293, Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland. Brian, always a pleasure, my man. How are things with you
Oh,
today?
right back at you, Mike Owens Media. I mean, your star is just launching across this MMA planet right now. I'm great, very happy to see it, and talking to you about your experience at UFC Boston must have been an incredible, life-changing week for you.
For a first UFC to go to a pay-per-view and to see the moment that we witnessed at UFC 292, to see a star being born was a very special moment. So very
Amazing.
grateful, but always grateful for your time, Brian. How are things with you in your world?
Going great, man. Great year for boxing. I've been enjoying that, and just want some big fights on the MMA side. And here and there we are getting them. So fun summer, but happy to get after it now ahead of this fall. Let's hit it. All right. I mean, let's get Connor into USADA already. All right. What are we doing here?
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, as I mentioned, Saturday night we've got UFC 293. We've got Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland and a whole host of Australasian fighters. I was having a little bit of a think because in March we saw a return of an English pay-per-view. We've just seen a French event with an ecstatic crowd over in Paris. But having said that, would you agree in saying that Australia has now become the number two market for not only UFC talent but also for UFC kind of
Yeah,
events?
certainly from a talent standpoint, the recent boom has been incredible, and you definitely can put Australia up there with the expansion and the boom that we're seeing in France and England and the UK in general in terms of the passion there. There does seem to be something about the climate down under in terms of the fight culture, and knowing that when they go there, big crowds are expected. And we've had monstrously big moments there. How Holm versus Rousey obviously being the big breaker, but how about Adesanya knocking out Robert Whitaker for the belt? So every time they go to Australia for a pay-per-view, it tends to feel regal and big. I just don't know if 293 fits into that sentence, Mike. As much as I love I love the storyline of the co-main, and yes, I can order off the menu with a couple of other fighters or fights that could end up tickling my fancy, but yikes, not what I expect or intended. Hard to complain in a month where we had an incredible, UFC Paris card. We got UFC Noche as a free fight night card in between, but 293, yeah, let's hope that it over delivers come Saturday.
It is obviously top heavy. And talking about the main event, I kind of wanted to get your perspective on Adesanya-Strickland from a boxing perspective, because in MMA, a lot of the title fights are the same. It's in theory number one contender versus challenger. In boxing, we see it slightly differently. So I'm going to give you three categories and you tell me which one Adesanya-Strickland fits into most. Does it feel like a voluntary defense? Does it feel like a mandatory challenger defense? Or does it feel like a real number one contender's fight against the challenger?
It's kind of a mixture of one and two, meaning it feels like a really strong mandatory title defense. And in boxing, where we have too many champions, too many world titles, and ultimately too many mandatory opponents, you understand the system of creating a rankings and mandatory opponents so that people who may not have the promotional connections or may not be commercially viable don't get passed over. Unfortunately, in boxing, that can be a corruptive system in which suddenly there's guys that are at the title level that you've never heard of and their resume doesn't explain anything. In this case, this is a very good mandatory scenario in the fact that Strickland's a better fighter, I believe, than the odds are telling us, and the chances we are collectively giving him ahead of this fight. It also feels voluntary in a bit, because Strickland being here does bring, although it's going to be dependent upon him the rest of this fight week, including the Thursday morning presser, to really move the needle with some verbal exchanges. But Strickland is a character. I think Strickland, being one of the rare middleweights that Izzy hasn't fought, as he's cleaned out this top 10 in such incredible order, that this has been one of the reasons he stayed around. I do think Adesanya eventually moves up to 205, eventually fights Pineda again, eventually tries to become a two-division champion for a second time. But he did have enough reason to hang around for fights that interested him. He stays busy. He's always targeted Strickland, for that matter. A guy easy not to like, a guy style-wise that Izzy must believe he could beat pretty easily, and the odds are telling you that Vegas believes that too. But I think DDP became, somebody in that category as well. And who knows, maybe if Khamzat Chimaev beats Costa, he's got another reason to stay around even longer. But the reason why it doesn't feel like an actual title defense isn't necessarily a knock against Strickland. He has won 2 in a row and looked great doing so. It's just that the 2 times he has stepped up to the number one contender, super elite level, he's come up empty. Close fight with Cannonier, boring fight. and we know the chances he took disastrously against Poatan. I would rather have Strickland earned it against a bigger name to get to this point. But when somebody has cleaned out the division and you're just looking for a fresh face, he did fit most of the requirements in that regard. So that's why people aren't like, picketing outside of UFC offices against this matchup. Even if you told me that it is going to play out as one-sided as the odds tease it might, you got to see it. Strickland is, in his own regard, whether on the mic or in the cage, whether purposely offending you or not, there is a must-see element that does surround him. So I give him that respect in terms of me saying, look, let's watch it on Saturday and see what happens.
I did want to ask about this because, as you mentioned, he's 2-2 over the last 4. He's dropped his 2 fights. He did drop the champion who will be facing on Saturday. Beat both of those guys. So in terms of when you look at the landscape, it maybe doesn't deserve the title fight in the traditional sense. So I'll ask you this plainly. Is Strickland in this position as a result of his persona, or is he in this position as a result of circumstance, meaning DTP not currently being available, Chimaev versus Costa being pushed back and all of that?
Yeah, I hate ties and I hate saying a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but a little bit of both, really. To be very honest, the timing was just perfect in that UFC already had the Sydney date on the books. They know Izzy is the kind that wants to move quickly, finish a fight as he finished Poatan in April, and he wants to be back in there on a set timeline and can certainly be the draw. I mean, this card is heavy on local favorites, not heavy on sort of, global crossover names, but Izzy alone is worth the visit. So it is a little bit of both in terms of how Strickland got lucky. I do also think that the whole sort of like, what the heck's going on with Khamzat Chimaev? Okay, we do know what's going on now. He'll be fighting Paulo Costa. But I still think we have a lot of unanswered questions, not just surrounding the weird weight miss ahead of that Nate Diaz, now Kevin Holland fight, but also where's he been? I know there's been injuries. I know there's been delays. If Khamzat had been in a different circumstance, let's say over the past, 6 months, I think he would have been the fight right here, even with DDP being available or not being available. This is where Strickland got lucky in the fact that when he fought Abus Magomedov, the most recent fight to get him here in a dominant one-sided stoppage in which he looked as great as he can be, we did have certain questions about Abus where we didn't know, is this going to be a showcase fight for Strickland or is this going to be a tough out? Turned out to be a showcase fight, but timing is everything in this game. If you're a veteran, to stay in shape and stay by the phone. Sometimes this stuff happens. For Strickland, it happened, but they also know they got a natural antagonist, a natural villain. He's been a little reserved, though, which I wonder if what Izzy said about UFC needing some assurances before they sign the dotted line to allow Strickland in this fight. Even with that, I think we're all expecting something from Strickland the rest of this week to almost validate part of why he's here. If you are that dude, if you're the Joker, then be that dude and come out and try to turn this division upside down.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And you mentioned the word turning upside down. It will be a lopsided fight. Odds-wise, a lot of people will be predicting a defense here. With that being said, given what you've seen from Strickland and also from Adesanya in this week and also in the lead up to this fight, is it giving you upset vibes? Is it giving you banana skin vibes? Because it is going to be an upset in the likes of a Pena Nunes, Rousey, Homer, Diaz, McGregor. Is it giving you those similar vibes or maybe not?
Well, some of it. And I'm meaning look, it's like, is there a trap element in this? Some people are making that comparison. A lot of people DM me go, BC, does this feel like Rockhold versus Bisping too? And there are some elements that connect there, meaning that we didn't give Bisping a chance there. He wasn't known as a finisher. He was late in his career. He was taking that rematch on short notice after Weidman got hurt. And Rockhold had absolutely dominated him 2 years before in Australia and finished him. The difference is, though, in that scenario to this one, I think surround that I don't think Strickland is as good as even an aging Bisping was in that point. I also don't think Izzy was as potentially vulnerable to taking his eye off the ball as Rockhold did. If there's ever been a criticism that explained where Rockhold's career ended up, right? Rockhold, a great fighter, was a great strike force and UFC champion at his very peak, but he couldn't keep it together over the second half, I think due to some arrogant decisions in the cage, outside the cage. That night, he sort of took his eye off the ball and left himself open to Bisping in the first round. I sat there cage side that night at UFC 199, and it was shocking, especially since Rockhold was sort of making a run at potentially a pound for pound number 1 or 2 with his performances. I don't think Izzy's going to succumb to that. I've really loved the responses from Izzy this week, just as I have from Strickland, by the way, about the realities of this fight, the betting lines, the people's expectations. And I really like where Adesanya is sitting at, where he says, look, Strickland's better than you guys are saying. Also not necessarily a world beater, but I'm going to give him that respect, and I plan on finishing him and taking care of him and making sure, there isn't potential trap fight elements. I think when you look at Strickland, the lack of being known as a one-strike finisher is going to hurt him here, although he potentially does have a wrestling advantage against Adesanya, and in theory should be working that into his game plan. He's got a hell of a trainer in Eric Nixick, as you know. I don't know if he's going to find big success, because who has had big success trying to wrestle Izzy and try to expose that supposed, vulnerability in him? His takedown defense, his ability to move is tough. I don't really see a natural upset path to victory for Strickland. What I do see, though, if we're going to give him the benefit of the doubt as some of the reasons why he's here, he does have 5-round stamina. 4 of his last 6 fights have gone the full distance. He does fight in an aggressive, high volume, high cardio pace where he's constantly coming at you. If he can do what he said this morning at Media Day, which I thought was a great quote, where they were talking about wrestling, are you going to wrestle? Whatever. And he just said, look, I got to fight like Kelvin Gastelum did. I think that's smart that he said that, because even though I don't think he's the same striker, and it's certainly not the same situation as Izzy was still evolving into the championship fighter that he is now that night. But that night, UFC 236 in Atlanta, where, again, I was very lucky to be cage side for in one of the greatest fights in company history, Gastelum brought the fight to Adesanya. Now, I don't think Strickland is as athletic, fast, or even as powerful as Gastelum. Different fighters. But one thing is he said about Strickland that he had to take some pause on in terms of preparing for him is he knows Strickland is crazy enough to go for it. And it's not just crazy enough to drop your hands and get into a war or whatever. No, there's some, despite the knockout loss to Poatan for Strickland, he can be smart. He can be defensively responsible. It's just the idea that Adesanya believes Strickland doesn't believe in himself enough to think he can win, but that actually makes him dangerous because of that, because it's almost this idea that, like, everyone's counting me out. I'm the replacement. I'm this, I'm that. I do think Strickland is capable of pulling this off, even above the, hey, every man's got 2 hands, he's got a fighting chance. I just don't think it's lining up well for him outside of something big, something crazy, a big cut, a big moment to really make this realistic. It's up to Izzy to do Izzy things, control that distance, and maybe step on the gas a little bit more, knowing the advantages he has, and try to make a big statement and knock him out. That's still the most likely ending here. But Strickland is enough of a wild card. Again, you do have to put some respect on his name. He will bring the fight to Adesanya. Let's see what happens. As long as we know when he said it, I'm willing to risk getting KO'd to try to win this fight, I'm a little bit more confident that he's got some level of a chance. And I say that because even though anybody can knock out anybody at any given time, you have to have the intention to take the risk, to create the moments that we love and endure. The Leon Edwards 5th round head kick. Like, you've got to have the intent to go after it. And I think a lot of people, when they get in there with Izzy and they see the difference in speed, timing, distance control, and they see what a master he is at creating that spider web and countering you and using your aggression against you, that it's easy to fall into a lull and lose a Jared Cannonier decision to Izzy. And that doesn't mean Cannonier was never close to the big shot, but it was almost he was resigned that if that big shot didn't happen, well, hey, I took my swing. I think Izzy realizes what we all should. Strickland's going to take his swing on Saturday. If he's going to get splattered, he's going to make Izzy do it to him.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I guess looking into the future, obviously we've got Dricus du Plessis as the number 1 contender, the man who, and obviously I'm a slightly biased since I've got the relationship with Dricus, but the man who probably should be in this position if timelines worked out. Do you feel like, given the Robert Whittaker win, DDP has secured his title shot next, or do you feel like it hangs in the balance in terms of the result of Khamzat Chimaev, Paulo Costa in October?
Well, I think he had secured it, right? And he would have been in this spot. Now, there's certainly fair questions to answer. UFC know that even though he beat Robert Whittaker, there's some lingering injuries that need to be addressed in recovery and healing there. They are trying to turn this around very quickly. Again, I think it was more about, they had the date in Sydney. They wanted Adesanya there. It's more strategic positioning on ticket sales and all of that. And is it really DDP's fault that he had to turn down this fight and wanted to wait till he was perfectly ready? No, you would think more fighters should do that, but a lot of times they don't. They roll the dice, whether it's fear that they're going to miss their opportunity or the idea that they know the quickest path to Dana's heart is of somebody who takes risks, last minute opportunities, all that stuff, right? Like the Kevin Holland Cowboy Cerrone playbook of I'm just going to be a gunslinger. UFC loves that. You did hear Dana this week, Tuesday night after the Dana White Contender Series, say, look, so they asked him, is DDP next for the winner? And Dana gave a Dana quote that I feel was a loaded quote. He said, how much, you guys know me, how much do I love when guys pull out of fights? That to me tells me that they are taking a close look, as they should, at what's going to happen with Khamzat versus Paulo Costa. If Khamzat wins in particular, really both ways. I mean, if Paulo Costa knocks Khamzat out, which is not likely, but certainly possible, could there be chatter for an Izzy rematch and let's give him a chance to redeem himself after the red wine incident? Sure. What I'm basically saying here is I think DDP could be in a spot where he's penalized or at least forced to wait. And I don't think that's a horrible thing, though. I never thought he would beat Robert Whittaker, and certainly not in the way he did. And I have to really look back and say that the amount of disrespect I showed DDP and just the history that we've had and the tape we had did not tell me that outcome was likely. But with that said, he's still a little bit of a work in progress. Even if he had to win one more, I think Khamzat Chimaev really is that meteor, that comet, that guy who is he's the wild card. I think Khamzat could have a Khabib-like run as a pay-per-view headliner. I mean, even that fight with Gilbert Burns a couple fights ago, we saw, everything we did, coverage-wise on our site for that, things were just booming. Khamzat is that guy. If he wins against Costa and does it in dominant fashion, I'm here to tell you right now, he might be getting the next shot, because that is an interesting opportunity to put the old champion against Adesanya with the growing title defenses and the idea that he's getting closer to one day taking that middleweight baton from Silva. And you've got the guy who literally could be next in the entire sport. Yeah, that's what Khamzat could be. If all things go as they tease, they might. So it's tough for DDP, but that is business. And you do sometimes, look at Stipe. Stipe at times has been in aggressive back and forth with the UFC. He's had to sit out long distances to get what he wants. But a lot of times, if you look at Steve Pay's run over the past few years, he may only fight once a year, but they're in really big fights. They're in really big title fights. Sometimes you've got to play the game along with the company, even if not being ready when the company wanted you to, in DDP's case right here, could in the short term penalize you. It's not fair, but that's the business, man. And Khamzat is a special, unique thing, which is, I think, is why we all just want him back and we all just want him fighting regularly. And we want to find out how good this kid really is. Yeah, no, 100%. Moving towards the co-main event, we have Tai Tuivasa facing Alexander Volkov, number 6 versus number 7 in the heavyweight division. Obviously, Volkov's coming off a 2-fight win streak, but has obviously tasted that upper level of the division and come up short on virtually every instance. Tai Tuivasa now on that 2-fight losing streak to Cyril Gane and Sergey Pavlovich, who the former title challenger and the current number 1 contender, so nothing to hang your head down too much. Having said that, which of these 2 fighters do you think a loss here would be more detrimental to? Oh, definitely Tai Tuivasa, in my opinion. And they're both at an age, certainly in a division where reinvention is so possible. It's never a deep division, even with it's top heavy right now in a great way, right? You got Stipe versus John, you got Pavlovich waiting, you got all these other Aspinalls and Gans, and I'm sorry, Stipe versus John. You've got Gane in waiting, Aspinall, you got Jonathan Almeida, you got a lot going on here. But Tai Tuivasa is an interesting thing. Is he going to be the next Derek Lewis, which is that fun-loving guy who will be in brawls and will win some he shouldn't and lose some he shouldn't and all that? Or is the flashes of brilliance that we saw against Cyril Gane, when he damn near was that close to actually becoming a legitimate title challenger, like a contender, where I never gave him that respect? I always saw the limitations, thought he would get mopped up by Gane. Still don't even understand how that happened, how he rocked him and was in that fight. And, Tai showed incredible heart to take that beating, but I don't think it was a smart move to come back 2 months later against Sergey Pavlovich with no momentum and get smashed in the first round. So I like that Tuivasa took the long layoff ahead of this fight. He talked about how much time he needed with his family and just to get away from the game and rest and heal. Smart move. But I feel like the first 30 seconds to a minute of this fight against Volkov is going to tell me what I need to know about how truly sacred Tuivasa is taking the potential opportunity he has in front of him. Meaning, far from a finished, technical wizard or even a great fighter, but he has some intangibles attached to him that are great, that are super elite. His chin, his power. Luke Thomas, so my partner on Morning Kombat, always talks about his sneaky athleticism. This guy has balls and he's willing to take monster risks and go after it. And if he focused a little bit more on smarter matchmaking, in my opinion, strategic smart matchmaking, and really getting in elite shape and really trying to round out some of the holes in his game to at least become proficient, at least the idea where you can go 50-50 with somebody, whether it's takedown defense, whether it's whatever. I do think he has a chance, because of what I saw against Cyril Gane, to fall into some huge opportunities. And it doesn't hurt that he's a commercial viably guy. He's a character. But even with his comments this week, I'm not sure that's necessarily who he is, what he actually wants from this game. And I know some of me saying that sounds disrespectful because I'm keyboard warrior journalist in my own basement and he's a pro fighter. But I think we all see a guy who does have some sneaky great potential, but seems to be resigned to be the all or nothing. If I can get you into a brawl and I can outlast you while taking a beating in the process, then we all drink shoeies. But the thing is, we all drink shoeies anyway, seemingly win or lose with that guy, right? Because that's what he's all about. I want to see against Volkov here if he has truly bought in and invested in himself and used this time off to, heal, grow, evolve. He had that beautiful streak of first-round knockouts, which got him the Gane fight. He's so young that there's still a lot of time. But I think this fight tells us if he's more going to be the Derek Lewis or if there really is a run. Because I've always loved Volkov. There's some limitations there. But I think Volkov really is the guy on that line, meaning he's either the best fighter of the second-rate heavyweights who, in all reality, won't end up winning or even fighting for a title, or he's the worst of the guys who are actually in title contention in the moment. I tend to believe it's the latter, meaning I think Volkov could go on a run. He's on a nice little streak right now, a 2-fight stoppage streak, won 3 of his last 4. There's always going to be some styles that'll be horrible for him. But Volkov is taking this fight like this is, an important one in getting him to that title, important one in launching him to the top. And he should. This is going to tell me right now who Tai Tuivasa is and who he will be going forward, because Volkov is beatable, and the odds tell you at about a plus 250-ish area for Tuivasa as the underdog, that people believe he's got a shot here. But it depends on what version of him and how focused he really is. And Mike, maybe I'm asking too much, but when you have certain intangibles that, like I said, are scary, they're quasi elite. As much as I don't want to see him be a body bag and stand in front of there and outlast a few dudes once in a while, I don't think he's that far away from being a problem for anybody on any night, more than he already is with the all or nothing brawl equation. I have respect for who he could be, but it all depends on him.
No, I completely agree. And obviously the comments that we've heard throughout the years from Tuivasa about how he's in this game for money, not for the championship, obviously, get your heart racing in terms of if he can go on that run, if you like. I guess with that said, we've talked about the kind of tier status of the heavyweight division, and we've seen these young guys, the Cyril Gane, the Tom Aspinall, the Sergey Pavlovich, really establish themselves as at the top end. I would kind of say Tuivasa and Volkov are still in that 2A range. With that said, do you think with a win for either guy, do you think they can move up into that first rate range, into those Aspinall, Gane and Pavlovich level, or do you think they're maybe still a step behind?
I do, depending upon where this division goes. And what I mean by that is we have John Jones fighting Stipe for the title in November. And even Dana White at that press conference I mentioned on Tuesday night, responding to a media question about the idea of what would be the next number 1 contender fight after that fight. He's not sure, and I don't think any of us are, what's going to come out of the John Jones Stipe fight. Are both going to retire? Is the winner going to retire? What's the situation there? I do tend to believe John Jones is going to be in it for more of the long haul on it, because I think he's going to keep having success, and that's going to fuel that. But if he's gone, and if Stipe is gone, it really reshuffles the deck, because like I said, this is not a deep heavyweight division. The heavyweight division has arguably never been deep, but it's as fun and top heavy at the moment with a couple dark horses than it's really arguably ever been. Really. I mean, I know there was that period with Brock, Kane, JDS that was really fun, and Frank Mir and Carwin but this could be something. If those two leave the equation, in the winner of this fight wins spectacularly, there's a potential for a big leap. I think even more if you're Tuivasa. I mean, if you beat Volkov, that might be the best win of your career right there. Even better than the Derek Lewis win at this point. If Tuivasa beats Volkov, he could make a leap with that personality into a really big fight. The problem is you're going to have to beat an Aspinall or a Gane to get there, most likely. But let's see how the division plays out moving forward. I think that's fair to say. Whoever wins this might be the bottom name on the rug of the future, elites and title challengers. And whoever loses this, they got to go back with Sergey Spivak to the other group on the other side of the line. That's just what it is.
Yeah, 100%. Last one for me, Brian. I do appreciate you're a very busy man. Obviously, we talked about the perhaps weaker areas of UFC 293. So I guess what I'd like to ask is, we've got Alexander Volkanovski as the pound-for-pound number one. We've got Israel Adesanya as potentially past John Jones, the poster boy, past John Jones and Conor McGregor, the poster boy of the UFC in terms of an active champion. When you look at the Australian MMA landscape, who do you think is next to maybe take over that and become a star in their own right?
That's an interesting question because I don't know yet. Well, City Kickboxing has really produced some top end fighters. Not everybody has gone to, we've seen guys flashes, Dan Hookers, Brad Riddell's. They've shown great flashes, but have really yet to put together, a sustained run at the very top at the title level. One guy you certainly have to circle, and I think his spot, if the card plays out the way it's set up now, and the preliminary featured bout that'll air live in the States on ESPN, is light heavyweight Carlos Ulberg. And that streak that he's on of late of big finishes, there's not much to critique or complain about. Now, he's got to keep stepping up in weight, and this fight against Jung Da-un is certainly another challenge in that direction. But Carlos Ulberg, we can make the sloppy DMs jokes because I'm sure the guy does well in his social and personal lives, but I think he can fight too. And iron does sharpen iron in the group he's been around lately. I wonder if he could be somebody that's coming on. Jack Della Maddalena is probably the best overall answer, although he's not fighting on this card, in terms of even with that last fight being a close split decision and, not against a household name. I've seen something in Jack that really tells me that the poise, there's a lot there that's sort of hard to put into words, but you see it when you know it in terms of, is that guy for real? Could he make the leap? Yeah, I think that guy could be the guy, but let's use Saturday's card, whether it's Ulberg, whether it's somebody else, because this is a Oceanic heavy loaded card, to see somebody take the opportunity and show us. I mean, Jack's the guy, but could it be Ulberg? Could it be somebody else? I want to wait and see, because what they've built there with this first generation here of super elite guys coming out of that gym, I think it's going to have ripple effects across the whole, island and that area of the world. You're seeing it, the fan base there is crazy passionate. You had the original guys that first made their name out of that area in the UFC, Elvis Sinisic, all the way to Soteropoulos, all those guys. But now the guys that come out of there are killers. They're ready for the title level right now. So let's see what happens.
I love it. BC, thank you always for the time. It's great to catch up as always. I wish you and Luke to continue success as always. Hopefully you can get that third awards. I can't quite remember the award off the top of my head, but I wish you to continue success. And as always, thank you.
Yeah, World MMA Awards. Let's see if we can win best MMA programming of the three-peat here. It's only because we got fans that are crazier than the other shows. But you know what? I'll take that.
Make sure to subscribe to the LowKick MMA YouTube channel for all the latest news, event previews, and interviews with some of the biggest stars in MMA.